You've been wondering, haven't you, how it is that everybody keeps telling us that the price of goods, the inflation on goods is very low, and that wages are gradually growing, and that people have more distributable income, more money to spend, and yet nobody seems to have more money to spend except the 1% or the very, very rich. How is that possible? Because after all, the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, has only been going up a couple percent a year, and that would indicate to us that goods are not running away from us, and that our wages and income and adjustments to Social Security and retirement plans, annuities, etc., that they're keeping pace with inflation, right? No, wrong, dead wrong. Let me show you how and why. In the last few days, I received a link to what is called the Chapwood Index. And in it, a gentleman has put together the original Consumer Price Index, which had a package of goods that was supposed to embody the average median incomes, persons, families, household goods and purchases. What the Consumer Price Index has done since then, what they've done with the federal Consumer Price Index, is that they continue to switch and adjust and take out items and replace items with so-called comparable goods to keep the inflation rate down, to keep the inflation, the appearance of the inflation rate artificially down. So what this guy did was he worked on that original package of goods and looked at what is happening to it on an ongoing basis. And what he found was, he shows, and I will link this for you, it's called the Chapwood Index. What he found was that the average city of the top 50 cities in the United States, which probably takes care of nearly half the population or indicative of it, has averaged about 10% inflation per year from 14 through 18, which would indicate that we have something close to 35 or 40% inflation, not 6 or 8% inflation. So what has that served to do to the average household in any of these cities? Well, let me give you a little idea. What I did then was made a spreadsheet. And I took the spreadsheet and assumed that a person had $2,000 a month of spendable income, and that $2,000 a month of spendable income, when using the Chapwood Index, would adjust for the Consumer Price Index and then adjust for the Chapwood Index, and would tell us what that package of goods that cost in 2010 and how it costs more or less now. So I took the about 6 or 7 cities, what did I take? 7 cities across the United States, ranging from the lowest, one of the lowest, which was Mesa, Arizona, to the highest, which is San Jose, California. And most of the, by the way, most of the indexes are 2/3 or 3/4 of the cities that were most highly impacted and have the most inflation are in California, not surprising. So in Mesa, Arizona, just to give you an idea, if in 2010 you had $2,000 and you thought, well, gee, what's this going to buy? What is it going to take to buy the same amount of goods with real inflation? And how does that work into it? Well, if you use the Chapwood, if you use Social Security, the index goes all the way to 2018, and it only takes $2,288 to buy what it cost $2,000 in 2010. Sounds like a deal, right? It's only a, 14% increase over that 8-year period of time. But what really has happened, if you use the Chapwood Index and you allow for the actual package of Consumer Price Index goods across that 8-year period, a person in Mesa, Arizona, who had a $2,000 income in 2010, it would take $3,775 to buy the same amount of goods in 2018. In other words, that family has effectively lost about $1,400 $1,488. They've lost 40% of their buying power. If they're making the same money in 2018 that they did in 2010, they've lost 40% of their buying power. So if it seems like things are getting tighter as the years progress, it is because of this. Things are getting tighter as the years progress. So then if you go all the way to San Jose in 2000, again in 2010, you start with $2,000, and by the time you get to 2018, it takes almost $5,000 to buy the same package of goods. It takes $49, $79, $61 to be precise, which means that if you had a steady income for 8 years of $2,000 a month of spendable money in a household, you would only have 46% as much buying power in 2018 as you had in 2010. So I looked at how this compares to some other things which have to do with, let me give you a couple other cities. Atlanta, for instance, it loses over half the value. Chicago loses more than half the value. Los Angeles is worse yet. And so I looked and compared the revised gross national product. What is it that the United States government tells us we're doing, because they tell us the economy is doing great and the gross domestic product is going up, right? That we are making more goods each year. Now, in order to do that, what they have to do is take all the goods that are purchased in this year as compared to last year and adjust for the consumer price index, because if there was 3% inflation, they have to take the 3% inflation off of this year in order to see what really happened in real gross domestic growth. So the nominal growth includes the consumer price index. The real growth does not. At least that's the way they read it. Well, you know, it's really handy to say we're making more stuff, because if you use an artificially low consumer price index, it only adjusts down slightly the nominal gross domestic product, and it looks like you're selling more. You're making more and you're selling more. The problem with that is, at least if you use the consumer price index, the real one, the Chapman index, that offsets, what you find out is that the revised gross domestic product of the United States has been going down every year since 2010. In other words, the United States, at least in relation to the consumer price index on a per household per capita basis, is making fewer goods than we made in 2010. And that would account for the fact that it doesn't look like the economy is really growing and exploding. What it does look like when you get into the weeds and get into the numbers is that the numbers are so skewed and so messed with and so played with that it looks like this country is growing. It looks like people are holding on. It looks like people are doing better, when in fact they are not doing better. So let's take, for instance, the revised gross domestic product. According to the Chapman index, that revised domestic product had actually gone down. Let me take a look at what they say. Had gone down something like 20% over the period from 14 to 18. Well, I took their same calculations and adjustments and went back to 2010, took the average of the gross domestic product and the average of the changes in the product, and figured out what it is that's happened over the last 8 years. And what I came up with on my little spreadsheet is that we are actually only producing about 65% of the goods in real value, 65% of what it was that we purchased, that we made in 2010. So what is more than that, let me show you how this fits into median income, because if we take an average household with median income, that is, a household in the United States, which across the last 8 years has gradually earned more money. And the obvious answer for everybody is, gee, I see these numbers are going up. That's really great. For instance, I took the middle state, which is how I had to do it since I don't have a median income for the whole United States. I took the Iowa median income, which is the 26th state, right in the middle. I took the Iowa income, and in 2010, that household income was almost $48,000. And over the last 8 years, in 2017, it went to $58,500. I'm rounding off, okay? I'm rounding off to the nearest $100. But when I take it and use the consumer price index and adjust that income in accordance with the buying power of that household for on the basis of real consumer price index. In other words, how much buying power does that income have in a package of goods equivalent to what they started with in 2010, okay? So obviously in the first year they had almost $48,000 of the equivalent usable median income for their work. Well, it drops to in 2014 to $41,000, the equivalent of $41,000. It drops in 2017 to the equivalent of $38,000. So in effect, the buying power of that family of four in Iowa, the median income of an average family in Iowa, has equivalently dropped $10,000 over the last 8 years. And what is more than that, that is about a 35% drop in income. What makes it even worse is that this is pre-tax income, right? So to the extent that this middle income family has taxes of various kinds, income taxes and others, and real estate taxes, and all of those have gone up, the effective median income has gone down more than I calculated into the process. So in effect, what I learned from doing this, and it was kind of a difficult and in some ways shocking exercise to get to the place where I could find out what is really happening. Because I know that the consumer price index is not properly indexing the package of goods that we need in order to maintain our daily lives. And it excludes a whole bunch of things. So when I worked through this process to find that we as median income earners have lost upwards of 35% of our buying power over the last 8 years, it makes a lot more sense to me as to why people are struggling to stay even. And all of these little blips, these little bright things, oh, wages have gone up. They've gone up by 1 or 2%. Oh, well, the cost of living has only gone up 1 or 2%. Well, it's lies. There's no other way around it. So let's take a look at what the real impact of this is. The real impact of this is that if you give somebody, let's say that you give them $20,000 or $50,000 a year as their fair share of what it is that they earn in this economy. And every year you add more money into the equation, which makes everything worth less, but you keep the guy at $50,000 so that every year he can buy less. Every year, the money that he has buys and purchases less than it did the year before. In effect, you have decreased his wage. In effect, you have decreased his value. In effect, you have decreased his salary. In effect, you've reduced his Social Security. And the impact of that, in this case over the last 8 years or so, is about 35% reduction. So if I sat you down in retirement and said, well, Mrs. McGillicuddy, you're going to get $2,000 a month in 2010, and you can kind of count on that, and you can count on it staying the same because the consumer price index is going to be adjusted for the cost of living. And she says, well, what about the real consumer price index, and the person would sit back and have to say, well, consumer price index is a lie, and you're not going to be able to buy as much. Let me tell you honestly that the $2,000 a month that you're going to get in 2010 is only going to have the buying power of about $900 in 2019. And so in effect, we will have cut your Social Security in half. There you are. That's the truth. The truth is that all of these indicators, wages, salaries, the rest of that, are going down. And you can count the Federal Reserve into the process, because what the Federal Reserve has done in its monetary management system, and it is intentional, folks, it is intentional, is that by putting more and more money into the economy, it decreases the value of every dollar. It's called inflation. And it's inflation with the supply of money. And you'll listen to these guys in the Federal Reserve and they'll say, well, we have to keep the consumer price index down, and we have to keep inflation down, and we have to keep wages from going up too much. And it's all lies. And effectively what they've done is that the top 1 or 2% have incomes that have exploded and doubled and tripled in this time, and their buying power has gone up, and everybody else's from the upper middle income down has either barely held water or have lost. So there's a reason why half the population now, the households in half of the United States, if they had a $400 expenditure on their car or health care or some extraordinary expense, would have to borrow money to get the $400 because they don't have it. So in effect, what we have done then is destroyed the middle class. They are gutting the middle class by ruining the value of our money and by falsifying and faking the federal price guidelines that tell us how things are going along. It is a lie. It is a damnable lie from top to bottom. Thanks for watching.